You will be able to ask questions in the chat box, or there's also in the Q&A, you can ask questions there. You are automatically muted just to make things a little bit more organized. So if you would like to say something, please just put up your hand and we can unmute you. Otherwise, Andrea and myself, we will also keep an eye on the chat box and notify Ida if there's anything that we need to know. I do see that there's a few firefly note takers and a few otters in the room as well. We prefer not to have that in the room. So, and it's because of security reasons as well. So if you see that your firefly friend or your otter friend had been taken out of the room, apologies for that. It's just how we prefer to do things this side. So Ida, almost your song to sing, time to sing your song. But first over to Andrea.
Thank you, Karina. And a warm welcome and a thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are thrilled to have you here for a fascinating exploration into the often overlooked yet profoundly impactful world of sensory processing in our daily lives. We are fortunate to be joined by Ida Doyer, a registered sensory integration occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience in both clinical and consulting fields. Her deep understanding of how sensations shape our nervous system has fueled a lifelong passion. Ida's expertise doesn't stop there, recognizing the critical link also between sensory awareness and workplace well-being. She also holds a master's degree in industrial psychology. Through her company, BrainSense Consulting, Ida has dedicated herself to empowering individuals, families, teams, and organizations with practical sensory self-management strategies. Today, in addition to Ida sharing her insights on how we can use sensory science in the workplace, she's also launching her brand new questionnaire, the Sensory Workstyle Assessment Profile. The SWAP focuses on holistic yet individualized employee well-being and performance strategies, as well as environmental adaptations. So get ready to discover how understanding your sensory style can transform your work and home life. And let's give a warm virtual welcome to Ida.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Let me just get my screen to share. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet, Ida.
Not yet. No. Apologies.
This is how it works. So just you practice, and I can tell everyone that did practice. So I just unshare and share again.
Stop share. Apologies.
And remember to share your sound.
Yes. Okay.
There you go, Ida.
Is this visible? As soon as I put it in slideshow. Oh, okay. Oh.
You had a sensory moment there, Ida.
I completed at a sensory moment here. Apologies, everyone. Yes. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you, Ida.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Andrea. But most of all, thank you to each and every one of you. I am very aware of the fact that our time is our most precious commodity. So it's no small thing for you to be spending this hour with us here today. Thank you and a warm welcome. Sensory science to workplace well-being, not only one element of well-being, but holistic well-being, as well as sensory science to employee performance and productivity. Through the Sensory Workstyle Assessment Profile, the SWAP, I'm excited and privileged and honored to bring sensory science to your places of work here today as well. As Andrea mentioned, I've worked in the field of clinical and consulting field, sensory integration, occupational therapy for many, many years. And over the years, I've seen three profound things. Sensory science can quickly and effectively modulate and calm emotions. Sensory science can predict and make sense of our behavior patterns. And if we can make sense of our own behavior patterns, we can also change them and tweak them. Sensory science is possibly also the most effective tool to unlocking the brain, to actually improve focus, attention, learning, concentration, and therefore our work performance and productivity. I just wanted to also confirm that to me, sensory science is not just theoretical knowledge. It's really applied in my life on a daily basis to manage stress, to improve productivity and performance. I have a very atypical day, but the productivity is there. To improve and assist with relationships, myself and my husband sit at opposite ends to the sensory spectrum, sensory sensitive and sensory seeking. Thank goodness for sensory awareness and self-management. And I've also used sensory science in my own life to embark upon a career change in my 40s. And I used the information around my optimal workplace environment to actually go about this. So let's look at a quote that I received this morning from my husband. You know more of a road by having traveled it than by all the explanations and the descriptions in the world. William Hazlitt. And certainly I have traveled and walked the road of sensory wellness. Let's look at the overview to this webinar. We're going to look at the science of the senses, which is hugely interesting and fascinating. Don't zone out. You need to know this. We're also going to look at brain hierarchy. The sensory brain is the entry point into the rest of the brain. It's the gateway. We're going to look at the sensory structures, because the sensory structures of the brain are the structures for calm and for alert, for regulation and for activation. Did you know that? We're also going to look at workplace trends, and I'm going to fit our threshold scores at work into these workplace trends and see how we can enhance and improve the difficulties at the moment at work through the use of the SWAP. I'm also going to touch briefly on the sensory systems: eyes, ears, nose, mouth, touch, and then trainers or tackies. We actually have two movement systems that we often forget about. I'm going to tell you about the SWAP data. I'm very proud of that. You can use the SWAP with confidence. We're going to touch on the three main sensory styles. I'm going to talk about practical applications and some case studies. And then after about 45 minutes, there will be time for questions, Q's, and A's. Let's pause for a second and look at the sensory brain. We often look at the left and right brain hemispheres, but let's take a horizontal cross-section of the brain and look at the bottom brain, the midbrain, and the top brain. So the bottom brain is our primitive reptilian sensory brain. Actually, I like to call it the reptile with the knife. It wants what it wants. It wants to do what it wants to do, when it wants to do it, and where. The sensory brain is very, very busy. You'll see that 80% of brain activity, and some clinicians reckon even 95% of brain activity is situated at a sensory lower brain level. A sensory brain is bombarded with 11 million sensory messages per second. And the sensory brain has to register this, orientate to it, and either respond or not respond. It can't respond to everything. But if the sensory brain responds, we want to see a functional, adaptive response. We don't want to see an over-responsivity. For example, your boss coming into work and saying, "Good morning, Ida," and having a complete and utter over-responsivity and a startled response. We also don't want to see an under-responsivity where you just don't even hear them. Don't say good morning. We want an adaptive functional response, especially at work. And before we can even access our midbrain, the limbic brain or the center of emotions, we have to go through the sensory brain, then the emotional brain, and then 20% of the time, we're at our clear thinking, cognitive, calculated, thinking brain. 20%, that one is in control. So really, if you want to make sense of and regulate your emotions, understand your behavior, enhance your performance and productivity, if you want to, for the first time maybe, shed light on and have a scientific understanding of your work style, your optimal environments, your relationships, this webinar is the one for you. The sensory brain matters. Brain hierarchy, as we saw on the previous slide, we first sense, then feel at midbrain level, then we think at cognitive or top brain level. And that is why the sensory brain, a regulated, calm, organized sensory brain, is really a prerequisite to accessing calm emotions and an alert mind, calm, alert. And you may ask me, but Ida, how? What? That sounds so theoretical. What sort of concept is regulate your sensory brain? Well, through the use of the sensory Workstyle Assessment Profile, you will learn how. You will learn the how-to around sensory self-regulation to really get to a point of an organized sensory brain so you can access the rest of the brain for calm, alert. And if you want to be anything at work this year, it is calm, alert. Sensory integration, or ASI, is really the body of research, the theoretical background that the sensory Workstyle Assessment Profile is grounded and founded upon. I'm really proud of that. Sensory integration is a specialty field available to occupational therapists after our 4 years of training with our honors. You could carry on and do a 3 or a 4-year post-grad in ASI, and you do it through the South African Institute for Sensory Integration. So Dr. Jean was an occupational therapist. She was also a neuroscientist. And in the beginning of the early 1960s, back in California, she started researching the impact of touch, sensitivity, or the over-responsivity to tactile input on 2 things: on anxiety, on our calm, and on concentration, on our alert. She was also the first person to ever research the 7 senses, the entire sensory spectrum, and not just the obvious 5. That's why through the use of sensory integration, through the use of the sensory Workstyle Assessment Profile, we can effectively and quickly regulate and calm our sensory brains, access calm emotions, and get to a point of alert, clear thinking. If we look at sensory science, it can be applied at individual level, team level, as well as organization level. Individual level, it's as simple as sensory self-awareness and sensory self-management. At team level, it's really beneficial to make sense of the sensory neurodiversity of a team, what the team is all about, how to manage the team, and how to optimize the team. Harvard Business School actually cited that once we unpack something that we all have in common, such as the sensory work style, trust is established, team cohesion is established, and culture and morale will improve. And happy teams are productive teams. At organization level, quite interesting and exciting, there are many articles about trauma-informed design, to actually design office spaces that heal. But I want to coin the term sensory-informed design, to really design according to your employees' bottom brain, primitive brain sensory needs, whether they are sensory seekers or sensory sensitives, and to really obtain talent and change the office from a mandate to a magnet. If we look at the sensory structures, the first one there connected to emotions is the amygdala. The amygdala is the brain's panic button. So the amygdala sits at the border between sensory and emotional brain. I actually call it a very emotional little sensory structure. There are cells inside the amygdala lighting up in direct response to threatening sensory input. And this threatening sensory input could be your boss coming at you with a panga in hand, a real threat, or it could just be your boss saying, "Good morning, everyone," a perceived threat coming from thinking brain level, but referring back to sensory brain, where there is an immediate fight, flight, stress, or panic response. And because of that fight, flight, stress response, we cannot then access our clear thinking brains. We cannot think ourselves calm again so easily. We always need to know what to do. How can I provide my amygdala with calming sensory strategies, as well as calming sensory environments right there behind your desk, in the boardroom, at work, etc. The next sensory structure is the hypothalamus. Hugely interesting to actually look at the connection between our sensory preferences and our behavior. So the hypothalamus controls the autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system controls our sympathetic stress response or our parasympathetic relaxation response. And there has to be balance between rest and relaxation, stress and relaxation at a physiological level. There's always a look or a need of sensory homeostasis. And if you think about the fact, when you are in sensory overload, when you've had enough, you will remove yourself and aim to reduce sensory input. But if you are in sensory deprivation, or you feel a bit bored or underactivated, you will look for more. It impacts our behavior directly, and it's such an accurate predictor to behavior patterns. I think it's high time we shed light on our behavior from a sensory perspective. It's our rituals, our preferences. If we look at the last sensory structure, these are the main sensory structures. There are so many, but the main sensory structures connected to emotions, behavior, productivity. The last one is called the reticular activating system, and this one is the brain's motivation button. So the reticular activating system sits at a very low brain level, brain stem level, and it receives all the sensory messages from all over the body, almost all of it except for smell, and it crosses over there and is relayed onto higher or more other different parts to the brain. So the reticular activating system, sensory relay system, controls our levels of alertness. And through that function, if you provide the reticular activating system with energizing, activating sensory input, and energizing, activating sensory environments, you can directly, effectively, scientifically improve productivity and performance. If we look at the workplace trends, 2023, going into and forward. Yes, Karina?
We've got a question. Let me just get there, asking whether you can explain why smell does not form part of that brain structure, or being influenced by smell.
Yes, the smell. Look, the olfactory cortex sits right behind a soft palate at the back of your nose. So this olfactory cortex, smell sensation shortcuts there. It doesn't have to go and relay to the reticular activating systems. The only sense, the brain's preferential sense, that goes directly to the smell cortex. And right next to the smell cortex, I can't help myself but to add this, sits the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is in control of memory, learning, and regulated emotions. And that's why we can use smell scientifically, certain smells to calm us, certain smells to activate us, to help us with our emotional regulation, with our learning process, and with memory. Right, workplace trends 2023 going into 2025 and onwards. Holistic well-being is a big, big thing. There's a need of all 4 pillars of well-being to be addressed: physical, mental, social, as well as spiritual. And I'm so excited to share with you today that the Sensory Workstyle Assessment Profile fits in, enhances, and benefits all 4 pillars of wellness. Firstly, physical. You will learn about your vulnerabilities to online addiction, for example. You'll learn about your eating habits, sleeping habits, and training habits, or lack of training. Those are all preventative physical well-being strategies. Mental well-being, you'll learn about a vulnerability to stress, depression, and anxiety, mood disorders, or at the other side of the coin, a vulnerability to addictive behavior patterns. Good to know, good to be aware of. You'll also learn to regulate and activate the how-to behind stress management, to prevent burnout, to prevent overload, and to really look after mental well-being as well. Social well-being, once we learn about each other's differences and preferences at sensory brain level, we can drop labels, we can increase our empathy with each other, and social cohesion, team cohesion, and relationships will benefit. Spiritual well-being, quite interesting and exciting to me. If an employee feels seen, heard, and understood at a very primitive bottom brain level, and over and above that, they feel utilized according to what they are really good at. And they also feel that they're contributing to the success of the organization. That is spiritual well-being, and that is what the SWOP can assist with as well. If we look at big workplace well-being trends, it's about having data-backed, science-backed, personalized, and effective interventions. Gen Zers and millennials, they can be tricky, but they want data-backed, science-backed, effective, personalized. They don't mind us having a bit of data about them. They just want to be burdened with something that is not right to them. So really a custom fit, individualized niche approach, and that is what the SWOP is. There's no one size fit all. Dual awareness, very interesting article, 2023, written in McKinsey about outside, inside, or right. Or actually, that was really me. But McKinsey wrote about our awareness of the outside world of work's impact on our internal landscape. And again, how our internal levels of regulation or dysregulation will impact our managers and our team, etc. So I added, start becoming aware of what the outside world of work's impact is on your inside, and go about making it all right again through your strategies and your adaptations. Digital fatigue, huge thing. It is not going anywhere. It's only going to get worse due to our virtual realities. Yeah, the visual and the auditory systems were never designed to sit behind a screen from 8 to 6, and then in the evening watch TV while you scroll through your phone. Never, never. It's going to impact our levels of overload, our levels of burnout. It's going to absolutely be detrimental to resilience, to well-being, and to output. If we don't learn right here, right now, how do we look after eyes and ears? How do we use touch, smell, taste, and movement to actually re-regulate and to be optimally healthy, happy, and productive at work? I have a lovely workshop webinar, future-proof despite outdated sensory systems, and that's a big one. I feel really strongly about that. Health equals productivity, obviously. Just recent US studies just underlining again that if we are healthy, we are more productive. And then there's big emphasis on brain health, biomedical health, neurosciences. I love it, because that is what sensory neuroscience is. And it's almost as if we're returning to what makes us uniquely human during this age of AI. What makes us unique? Our brains, our nervous systems, our sensory systems, our ability to notice what's going on around us, to register that, to orientate to that, and to adapt, to stay adaptive, to stay functional, to stay calm, alert, productive, and healthy. So I'm very excited, actually, about the workplace well-being and productivity trends. Sensory thresholds are part of our genetic makeup. There's no right or wrong. You can't do the swap and then redo the swap and see if you can improve on your answers. It doesn't work like that. It sits at neuroanatomical sensory receptor level, and it's different for all of us. It's fine. We just have to have awareness and manage. And so sensory thresholds is really about how quickly and how intensely we register. So we all have a sensory system. We all have sensory receptors. They certainly do not fire at the same intensity. So we cannot possibly process the work environment or experience the work environment in the exact same way. High sensory thresholds or high senses are our more senses, where we need more stimulation for a longer period of time before our sensory thresholds are met, and we possibly go into sensory overload. So sensory thresholds with a high sensory work style also go into overload. It just happens a little bit later on in the day. We have medium or neutral responses sometimes in some of our senses, where it depends on the day, the scenario, the task, and the people we find ourselves with. Sometimes we need more stimulation, other times less, and we need to learn to listen. And then low sensory thresholds, we only need a little bit of stimulation for a shorter period of time at a much lower intensity before sensory thresholds are met, and we go into sensory overload. And what does sensory overload look like? Look, it's just dysregulated emotions, from anxiety to stress, depression, irritability, anger, and then, of course, fatigue, and then poor productivity, stakes, poor performance, slow work speed, difficulty to concentrate, difficulty to think straight. And we all have different individual fluctuations within our sensory systems, and we have to unpack those. For example, myself, I have really low visual, really low auditory, and really low touch sensory thresholds. Now you can imagine what the work environment needs to look like, sound like, and feel like for me to be comfortable. Then I have really high smell and taste scores, where I'm always overusing perfume, and also trying to utilize eating to either manage my stress or to wake myself up. So there are scientific ways through textures and tastes and specific foods that we can go about it a bit more scientifically, and it is included in the certification training. I also have very sensitive vestibular scores, changes in head position, which means a city commute is quite overloading, and I get really anxious if I'm not driving, and everyone else gets anxious if I am. And then I have high seeking scores for proprioception, movement against resistance, gravity, weight training. So it's important and interesting to start unpacking the individual scores as well and not expect just a total score. 7 sensory systems. Oh my goodness. Eyes, ears, nose, mouth, touch, trainers. 2 information senses or work senses or knowledge senses, visual and auditory. We have to guard them. We are the gatekeepers. We are responsible to keep us from getting into that complete and utter overload and shut down. Remember the mass exodus of those CEOs leaving their places of work in 2023. One of the 4 reasons they cited for resigning was overload. They didn't say sensory overload, but certainly they meant sensory overload. So we have to guard eyes and ears. We have 3 social or relationship senses telling us how we engage with our colleagues. What are our proximity preferences? How do we feel in an open plan office environment? Are we comfortable or not so much? Touch, smell, taste. Also important to remember, if we work remotely or in silo teams, there might be a deprivation there with a lack of oxytocin, and it's because of the fact that there's no proximity to your colleagues, and you may start feeling left out or overlooked. We have 2 regulation senses, the senses of movement. Firstly, vestibular, changes in head position, head movement. Proprioception, changes in body position and body movement, and these are underutilized. Movement calms us when we're stressed, and it wakes us up when we're lethargic. I have to train in the morning to manage my stress for the day to come. My sensory-seeking husband has to train in the morning to get himself properly awake and activated for the day to come. So regulation senses often deprived. We cannot possibly sit passively from 8 to 5, from 9 to 6, and expect peak performance and output. I'm just going to illustrate 2 visual clips, 2 photos and 2 audio clips. The point of this is to show you that in each one of our sensory systems, there are activating as well as calming sensory input. We talk about excitatory and inhibiting. But if we know what we're doing, we can change our own levels of activation. And I want you to notice for yourself how the 2 photos impact your levels of activation, as well as the clips. It's the exact same visual, but 2 different audio clips. Oh my gosh. I cannot even. You know what I
Yeah,
don't
maybe we can ask people to jot down in the chat box, what the sensory experience is when they look at this.
I would love to hear your opinions. I am always amazed at clients saying to me that this is my organized chaos. I'm on top of this. I know exactly what goes where. But it's actually shock and horror. And then I refer them to Harvard Business School, cited that visual clutter, disorganization is not good for any of us. Our nervous system processes a feeling of overwhelm and overload. Now, this individual cannot possibly spend a minute on a screen with that environment because there has to be a bit of give and take. Although I have to say that little Hawaiian parrot is something that I now have to have. Let's look at the next.
Maybe I can just give feedback. Maybe just go back 1 slide again. Most people who commented here says, this is too much. It won't work for them, and they won't be able to function, and it creates anxiety, and they want to run away, and it's overwhelming. All those things that I would maybe also expect. But then someone said, who sneaked in and took a photograph of my study? So I would be curious to know, can some people just not function well enough in these kinds of environments?
Identify yourself.
She has, but I'm not going to.
No, don't. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, let's rather look at the next slide where there's a bit more calm and order and visual minimalism. The photo to the left, however, I have to quickly quit because I can't help myself. Firstly, I would have thrown out the dustbin. Now look at my visual system. I see really quickly and really intensely, even what you never meant for me to see. I would have thrown that out immediately. Then I would have swung the PC and the chair to face the wall with a soft natural light coming from the side, as opposed to facing directly into the bright glare. And then I would have added some plants, greenery, a fidget box with your tactile items, a photo of a loved one, and maybe a soft rug underneath that chair. I can already anticipate the auditory overload resulting from that chair on those tiles. So maybe a bit stark and clinical, but at least a good start. Let's listen to the two audio clips with the same visual. Oh, Plato. Music is more powerful than reason in the soul, and I can feel it. I can drive to the Colosseum with pleasure with that music playing. I read an interesting article about a guy the other day that needed to visit Home Affairs, and he was ready with his favorite playlist. And through that playlist, he was self-regulating and self-activating to get the job done. So music, in terms of the calming properties, but also in terms of the alerting, activating properties, we can put music to use like true neuroscientists, and we have to. But let's just touch on the Sensory Workstyle Assessment Profile data, which was also like music to my ears. I'm very proud of this tool. It is reliable and valid. You can use it with confidence. Please do. It's not a diagnostic or a psychometric assessment. It's self-awareness, self-management, team awareness, team management. The team debriefs are quite powerful. Our preliminary data sample consists of 250 individuals, mostly female, mostly South African population, although there were a few international completions and delegates as well. The scale normality ranges were acceptable. Thank goodness. There was a symmetrical distribution of the scores, and because of this, we could develop norms. So there are norms for the swap, and they were developed on this relatively normal distribution. Looking at reliability, we used Cronbach's and McDonald's scales, and that looked good. It ranged between 0.68 and 0.86. What does reliability mean? I had to remind myself, reliability means all delegates are likely to respond to the items on the swap on a scale consistently, and that's what we want. There was also structural validity, which is great. Validity means, does the swap assess what it sets out to assess, yes or no? And the swap is assessing sensory sensitivity, or this, over-responsivity, low sensory thresholds, towards 7 interrelated unique sensory systems. So yes, it does assess that. And if there are items on the swap actually assessing sensory seeking, the scoring is a reverse scoring. So please complete your sensory workstyle assessment. Look at your report. The more you order, the more you complete, the more extensive our data analysis will be. Ongoing process to tweak and enhance this measurement tool.
Ida?
Yes, Karina?
I'm giving you just a chance to get a sip of water, but there's a question in terms of gender differences, whether the research showed whether there's big or significant differences between men and women in terms of these preferences.
Thank you, Karina. Actually, no. The research going back to air sensory integration, all of those research articles show that we can't pin sensory preferences or thresholds either to a gender, to an age group, to a culture. It is hereditary and genetic. And they stay relatively constant over the course of a lifetime. So we can't really guess what we are. We all sort of know I'm quite fidgety, or I love my baths, or I love my big bags of chips when I'm stressed. But those sort of sensory awareness levels need to be enhanced at scientific level. Have a look at what you're all about so you can self-manage and improve your well-being and your performance. So this gets me really excited, the practical application of the SWOT results. I thought about this a bit, and I realized it actually sits at two main pillars. Firstly, the sensory workstyle assessment will tell you how you work, where you work best from, or where you prefer to work from, with whom, doing what. That is huge. That is huge. It tells us how we go about with information, visual, auditory. It tells us how we go about with people, our comfort levels with our colleagues. And it tells us a whole lot about our energy levels, productivity and output, and our movement needs, very specific scientific movement needs during a workday to stay on task. So that's the first level of benefit to practical application. But also the sensory workstyle tells us, how do we regulate? How do we self-calm? And how do we activate? And how? Which are my more senses? Where do I need to stimulate to feel focused, motivated, and energized? Very interesting. Which are my managed senses, where I have to cultivate know-how around in terms of what I need when? And which are my less senses? My less senses are visual, auditory, and touch. That's it. Less is more. Then we also learn about the sensory diversity in a team to dovetail and to optimize and to get a team, to look after them at such a basic bottom brain level. That's such an important human need. If we look at task environment collaborators analysis, we can go about analyzing the task ahead for the day, the environment we're going to find ourselves in, and the people we're going to complete this task with. And that's hugely helpful. For example, practically, this here webinar, as you saw, it's quite important for me that it goes well. So let's say high effort task. I love it, but there's a bit of stress. High effort task. So environment. Am I going to sit at my husband's desk? Am I going to sit in a Tasha's coffee shop or open plan office environment? Absolutely not. I need to sit right here where I know what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like, in my chair behind my desk. Collaborators, Karina and Andrea, thank the good Lord for them. They make me feel calm, alert, and functional doing this high-level task. So this is what we can very easily, very quickly do: task environment collaborators or colleagues analysis. I have a few movement options that I'm just showing. That top left standing corner, I love. To have a change in head position, a change in body position, and a change in physical environment is huge. It ups your productivity immediately, scientifically. I just read an article on isolation and loneliness, especially amongst youngsters, where they are working remotely or hybrid or siloed. And I'm just thinking those Nest chairs might just provide a safe space to connect, to talk, to share. Yeah, movement options, really important. outdoor access to a garden. You can't be a highly functional individual, expect to be healthy, expect to perform for your organization with no access to a garden. I'm very strict around that. Sensory styles, we have high, medium, low styles, and then they will prefer different environments, different tasks, and different colleagues. Interesting. You can help your team to do sensory check-ins. There's an ascending and a descending curve, and the upward curve, and they can ask themselves 5 things. Am I okay? Am I stressed? Am I in sensory overload? Am I in shutdown? Am I out of control? So we have to catch ourselves where we are at stressed and sensory overload level, and then use your strategies and your environmental adaptations right there. The descending downward curve, am I okay? Am I bored? Am I understimulated? Am I sleepy? I hope not. Or am I asleep? We also have to catch ourselves before we're completely asleep or even sleepy at work. So those sensory check-ins are really practical, easy, and quick to do. You have to know yourself to manage yourself, know your team to optimize your team, so we can all be well, productive, calm, alert, and therefore powerful. I actually want to invite you to think of one person. I hope there's one person in your life that's calm, alert most of the time. Isn't that someone that you respect? Isn't that someone that you will trust with your challenges, that you will allow to mentor and speak into your life? If we are calm, alert individuals, clinicians, managers, we are powerful and we have influence and we can positively impact people's lives, which is what the good Lord designed us and created us to do in the first place. Quickly, the high sensory styles. Oh, I love them. I have a manager of a team with such high auditory threshold scores. The amount of information he bombards his team with and the volume at which he does it, unknowingly and unconsciously pushed them into such overload and overwhelm that it became quite tricky. And all we had to do was create awareness. And now things are going much better. What I also love about the high sensory styles is, remember this, if you want them to shoot the lights out, take them outside of their comfort zones. Very important. Don't let them do the exact same task in the exact same way week after year after year. I also have a lovely trading team who are all sensory movement seekers, and they all wanted standing desks. So I'm motivated for them to get their standing desks. It's quite expensive. And they were so happy, productivity improved. But then later on, I heard comments such as feet, exhaustion at the end of the day. I had to laugh because they're such all or nothing type individuals that they neglected to alternate between flexible seating options and standing and sitting. So sweet. Medium sensory styles. I actually saw a group of HR managers at an auditing firm, and most of them had a medium sensory style. They actually said to me, Ida, we can listen to everyone's opinion. We can mediate. We can negotiate until the cows come home. But as leaders, it's quite tricky for us to actually develop the skill to make a decision and to enforce it. So even the medium sensory styles have to sometimes get to a point where they really, truly understand who they are, what's really right for them, make a decision, enforce it, roll with it, and have peace around that. Low sensory styles, myself, can be sensitive and avoiding, but very intuitive. Sure, and we are early starters. Goodness, high work ethic, accuracy, structure, and systems. Look, for a low sensory style, keep us in our comfort zones where we feel comfortable, safe, and appreciated, and we'll shoot the lights out. So it's so different to the low and the high sensory styles. I saw a pediatrician the other day, and she has extremely low visual, auditory, vestibular scores, and she needed to commute 3 times a week really far to a hospital, and she was in complete and utter shutdown to the point that it presented as depression. She no longer wanted to engage in family activities, social. She didn't want to do her leisure time activities anymore. And really, it's about looking at that commute, cutting that commute for improved well-being and improved productivity. And then myself, my career change, I was really unproductive following a morning in my clinical practice of treatment sessions. So in the afternoons, I had to get to my admin, report writing, etc. And I was so useless with that because of sensory overload. So really being a consultant is a much better fit to a low sensory work style as opposed to working as a clinician. To summarize, to recap, the sensory brain. The sensory brain regulation is your first step. It's your first port of call. It's your first priority. You have to do this. You have to do this. First, regulate the senses so you can access your emotions, and then your alert mind. And of course, then we go about whole brain regulation. We talk about sensory regulation, bottom up, and top down cognitive behavioral regulation. I love that workshop as well. So really the SWOP tells us how I work, how I regulate, how I activate. It's different for all of us. It's fine. Tells us how the team works, how the team regulates, how the team activates. And then when you complete your SWOP, you're gifted with a SWOP assessment with report today. It's really quick, 91 questions completed in under 10 minutes or around 10 minutes. Don't overthink. It assesses the crocodile with a knife and not the CEO thinking brain. You will get a 12-page report, nice and short. And the report gives us a score for each one of our senses, what it means, a word of wisdom, profound insight there, well-being strategies, and productivity adaptations. Then, just want to mention, to explain sensory integration and to explain it clearly and in an easy way is no small task. Certification training I will recommend to really learn, for example, about the active and passive response to high thresholds and the active and passive response to low thresholds. It looks very different in the world of work. So certification training, it is CE accredited, which is always welcome. Mostly e-learning with 3 CPD questionnaires. There's a lovely technical manual. Read it, full of practical ideas, activities, tips, and tools. And then masterclass webinars to just drive home the message and to really get that optimal return on investment. Right, Aristotle, I have to salute him. Take him to dinner. I wish I could. The senses are gateways to intelligence. He grasped brain hierarchy. There is nothing in intelligence which did not first pass through the senses. So really, it's an intelligent thing to first regulate our less intelligent sensory brain so that we can be scientific and intelligent around being well and being productive at work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida. For a moment, I was surprised by the picture of Aristotle. I thought he grew up in a different age, but yeah, that's great. Maybe just, we're almost out of time, but Ida, I think 1 or 2 questions that I picked up. Maybe if you can talk about working with children, whether this assessment would be appropriate. Andrea did share the information that the norms are from 18 years up. So how do you use this with children? And the other question that came up a couple of times is in terms of ADHD. How can this be useful in practice?
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, everyone. Firstly, children, definitely not. We have different assessment tools that go back to the clinical field of occupational therapy, where we use the Winnie Dunn sensory modulation profile. We also use the Jean Ayres SIPT, the sensory integration praxis test. Oh my gosh, that thing is so difficult to administer and to score and to measure, but it's a complete different body of assessments for the little ones. Remember, because we can't just assess their response and their regulation response to sensory messages. We do assess that, but we have to assess their sensory discrimination. Do they feel what they have to feel? Can they motor plan because of that? Do they feel their pencil? Do they have fine motor, gross motor, reading, writing skills, etc.? So there's a whole lot of functional skills that are developed upon sensory discrimination, and that is not included on the SWOP at all. It's not applicable to adults. Then the ADHD, it is such an incredible tool. I think it's a non-medication route to optimal concentration. And so if you know what your sensory scores are all about, you can go about scientifically to improve your focus and attention, your registration of information sense input. You can look at your behavior patterns, because those are quite important for all of us, but especially when there's a distractibility ADHD, to really look at, am I eating? Am I sleeping? Am I logging off from all screens? Do I spend time outdoors? Do I have healthy social connections? Just those like really basic building blocks for a healthy nervous system. And then we can also look at how to feel regulated and calm alert, because if there's a level of stress or overload, of course, concentration's not what it should or can be as well. So this is a really helpful, insightful tool to take yourself through those 4 or 5 steps of optimal cognition: focus and attention, registration, let me tweak my behavior, how do I get myself calm alert? And of course, it'll be different for everyone and an individual approach, but definitely it impacts focus and concentration profoundly.
Thank you, Ida. There's 1 minute left. Just another thing, I know you work a lot with high school children and students as well. Do you then use an assessment, or do you, I know you're not using this specific assessment, but do you use one of the assessments that you mentioned just now, or do you just, on a more qualitative level, work with the information that you pick up from them?
I do both, Karina. There is an assessment. There are some of the older assessments that are for 13 to sort of 20-year-old, that we can do that and use that assessment. For the sensory studying population, the students, they are in need of so much support and assistance and help. But I also do interviews with them. I do qualitative. And often once they've completed their assessment, it affirms where the focus of the feedback must be. Is it on emotional stress management, or performance anxiety when they're writing a test or an exam? Or is there really a behavioral issue where they're spending so much time online because of a high-seeking visual score and they don't realize they're in visual overload? Or is there really a calm alert exam writing, sort of, how do I get myself organized and regulated as they're handing out the papers? What do I do in the chair right here, right now? And then sometimes it sits at motivation level. When they're high sensory seekers, they feel a bit demotivated and everything's too boring and too dull and too predictable. And they really connect with their procrastination. And once you help them and give them insight into who and what they're all about and the practical tips for self-activation, they run with the science, they implement, and they do really, really well as a result.
Thank you so much, Ida. And Andrea, I'll give you a chance, maybe just from my side. This is highly interesting and it's so relatable. I think we all, as you were speaking, we sort of did a little bit of a qualitative assessment of ourselves as well. I can confirm that I've done the assessment. The report is very useful, and implementing small changes in your work environment actually has a huge impact on productivity and motivation, which is great. So Ida, also the feedback, nice participation. People, the feedback that people give is that it is really very interesting. And thank you so much for all the preparation and the hard work and sharing. And then maybe just to confirm that you will receive in the next day or two, everyone will receive an email with a link to this recording. You can please go and watch that again. There will be more information about the assessment also in the email, and you will also have the opportunity there will be more information about the certification training, but there will also be a link that you can use to complete your own assessment and get your own report as well to see how it can work for you. So thank you so much, Ida.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Karina. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.